So now I would like to move on to our panel discussion 1. So all the panelists and the moderator, please rise and proceed to our stage, and let's welcome them with a big round of applause. All right, so now I'd like to hand over the proceedings to our moderator, Mr. Julius, if you please.
Thank you very much, and welcome to our first session, which I'm honored to moderate. As Nakasa-san has described, we are launching a Pathfinder initiative to create an Asia-Pacific network of interoperable voluntary carbon markets, or VCMs, and we are now in the process of developing the work plan for its initial year. In this session, we have invited key stakeholders to share with us the perspectives from their respective institutions on the way forward to achieving the goal we have set for our initiative. So joining us in person, we have Mr. Gary Hao, Regional Co-Head for Asia and Head of Legal, Hong Kong and Greater China and North Asia for Standard Chartered Bank Limited. And we have Professor Megumi Hara, Professor of Law, Chuo University, and member of the UNIDROIT Working Group on the Legal Nature of Verified Carbon Credits and Private Law. Joining us virtually, we have Mr. Ken Chiu, Head of Carbon and ESG and Director, Core Climate Global Limited, Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, or HKEX, who will speak on Hong Kong's ecosystems together with Gary. And then we also have Mr. Anton Tsvetov, Associate Director for Policy, the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, or ICVCM. We have Ms. Lydia Sheldrake, Director of Policy and Partnerships of the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, or VCMI. And we have Mr. Hari Gade, Senior Climate Change Specialist, Climate Finance and Economics Climate Change Group of the World Bank. So we will have about 50 to 60 minutes for the entire session. I will call on the panelists one by one to speak for not more than 7 minutes each on the perspectives from their respective institutions and efforts to promote interoperable VCMs in the region. And then hopefully we will have time for some open discussion and Q&A. So without further ado, let me now invite Gary and Ken to start the initial round of panel remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. Looking back at 2024, 2024 was actually the warmest year since records began in 1850. And it was the first calendar year that average global temperatures rose or exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the past 10 years are the 10 warmest on record. Uncontrollable wildfires are burning LA still this week as we speak, which shows the world is in urgent need of action to accelerate our transition to net zero. Transition away from carbon-intensive industries such as coal is complex and challenging. There are about 5,000 coal-fired power plants in APEC, making up 20% of global emissions. There's therefore a paramount need to direct funding and investment to enable transition in Asia's emerging markets. Now, carbon markets are essential for increasing financing for emission reduction activities, and linking mandatory and voluntary carbon markets globally and regionally allows for greater market liquidity, access, and transparency. The cooperative approaches set out in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, endorsed at COP29, are a significant step forwards towards a global carbon market. However, there's a lot of work to be done. Firstly, we need better market infrastructure. Facilitate trading in carbon markets, we need a reliable global registry for tracking carbon credits and ownership of the underlying emissions reduction, transparent reporting systems, and secure platforms for trading and transfer of credits. Secondly, we need a globally recognized standard and a credible framework on the use and integrity of carbon credits. In that respect, we continue to support the ICVCM's core carbon principles. and call for APEC governments and policymakers to endorse the CCPs as the minimum global standards. This would ensure that carbon credits supply is of the highest quality. With that, APAC has a huge opportunity. It has a huge opportunity to demonstrate its leadership, and the Pathfinder initiative can show that. In particular, I think Hong Kong can play a super connector role in establishing a regional voluntary carbon market. China's mandatory carbon market, ETS, started trading in July 2021, and it has become the world's largest emissions trading platform, accounting for over 40% of China's CO2 emissions. China's Certified Emissions Reduction Scheme, the CCER, allows for generation of tradable offset credits, which can be used on the ETS or tradable by any enterprise. There is huge potential if mainland China's carbon markets can connect to other carbon markets by allowing trading of its carbon credits outside of mainland China. Now, if I may now hand over to Ken Chiu of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange to talk about their international carbon marketplace, Core Climate, please.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary, for setting excellent scenes for me to introduce a bit more about some of the efforts that Hong Kong has done. But before I start, I would like to special thanks to ABAC, JC, and Gary for including a session about Hong Kong in this panel. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to share the latest development of the carbon market in Hong Kong. Now, back in 2022, in light of the booming trends of carbon markets development, we started the feasibility study to build one in Hong Kong. It was an effort collaboratively together with the Hong Kong Security and Futures Commission and Hong Kong Exchange. Now, globally, as what Gary mentioned, there will be a massive carbon gap to close to keep the 1.5-degree pathway challenging, while regulatory and corporate commitments are accelerated after COP26. Domestically, China has the significant carbon reduction potential, and yet its carbon market is still in a relatively early development stage. And therefore, Hong Kong has the capacity to add value to global carbon markets because of its ability to facilitate two-way capital flows between China and international carbon markets with its robust infrastructure and internationally aligned regulatory regimes, globalized ecosystem, and deep talent pools. So Hong Kong EX launched an international carbon marketplace called Core Climate in October 2022, which is currently the only carbon marketplace that offers Hong Kong dollar and renminbi settlement for the trading of international voluntary carbon credits. Allow me to go into a bit deeper about Core Climate. We aim to provide an easy access, one-stop, and integrated carbon marketplace that includes trading and settlement functions for corporates, investors, and project owners across the whole climate value chain, contributing to the realization of global carbon neutrality goals through connecting capital with climate-related products and opportunities in Hong Kong, mainland China, Asia, and beyond. There are a couple of features of Core Climate. One, so we have shelved internationally certified carbon credits with some of the requirement overlaying on the projects. We have a wide range of projects available, both project types and locations. We only accept vintage after 2016 and onwards. We accept trading modes of peer-to-peer and marketplace with DVP settlement. And also, Core Climates were built on the back of a Hong Kong International Carbon Market Council that include 12 experts from the market, including Standard Chartered Bank. As of end of 2024, the number of participants, we only onboard institutional participants, have reached 100, which is 4 times increase since launch 2 years ago. while the number of projects reached 60 or above, which is like 3 times increase since launch. And recently, in December 2024, Core Climate provided a settlement service for Cathay Pacific's carbon credit procurement and successfully settled carbon credits on Core Climate platform, which would be used for Cathay Pacific's Fly Greener and corporate offset programs. One point to highlight is that we're not only looking into trading, but also emphasizing how we can mitigate risk, including counterparty risk, from carbon market transaction, especially knowing that a lot of transactions are done over the counter, like what Mr. Nasakawa mentioned. Another part I want to highlight is our collaborations with China. And what Gary mentioned, Hong Kong has played a vital role in connecting China with the world. As testified through existing cross-border mechanisms, such as Stock Connect and Bond Connect, etc., Hong Kong EX has done a few good use cases or successful cases of doing so. As for carbon, we're definitely open to any opportunities in cross-border collaborations with markets in mainland China, and we've been keeping a very close dialogue with a lot of stakeholders from mainland onshore. We even have signed MOU with various markets, including the Carbon Exchange Guangzhou, Shenzhen Green Exchange, and Beijing Green Exchange. Meanwhile, Hong Kong EX has joined the Green Development Investment and Financing Partnership initiated by the Belt and Road International Green Development Coalition as an inaugural member to boost green finance development in BRI region. We're looking forward to working very closely with all stakeholders, and of course those from Japan and others in the region down the road. Let me pass the stage back to Gary or JC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. So Hong Kong, being an international financial centre, is also rising as an international green finance centre. The volume of green and sustainable bonds arranged in Hong Kong topped the Asian market in 2023, accounting for 37% of the regional total. In terms of standards, in December, or just last month, the Hong Kong Financial Services and Treasury Bureau set out a roadmap to require publicly accountable entities to adopt the ISSB standards no later than 2028, leading Hong Kong to be among the first jurisdictions to align its local requirements with ISSB standards. Hong Kong is also at the forefront of sustainable finance innovation with a successful pilot under the HKMA FinTech Supervisory Sandbox. In May 2024, we settled tokenized carbon credits with the use of tokenized deposits. This was done by our digital bank, Mox Bank, and its incubated venture, Libera, and MasterCard. So Hong Kong being positioned at the forefront of sustainable finance innovation, adhering to international standards, can, in addition to its existing capabilities of connecting China to the international financial markets, can also establish itself as the international gateway to China's carbon markets. To close, we support the Pathfinder initiative towards building an effective regional carbon market, and I believe we can make some great progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Ken. So next up is Megumi. The floor is yours.
Oh, it's working hard. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Megumi Hara. I'm a professor at the University of Chuo. I'm here with my capacity as a member of a working group in UNIDROIT, which is working on creating a principle on private law nature of carbon credit, so voluntary carbon credit. I'm not sure if I can use, thank you very much. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So UNIDROIT is an organization, an intergovernmental organization, which stands for International Institute for the Unification of Private Law. And here we are trying to create a principle on a private legal nature, as I said. Why is private legal nature important? So basically, private legal nature is important because unless we are clear on the private legal nature of it, we cannot really determine the legal effect of a transfer. We can't determine the legal effect of what it means to collateralize a VCC. We don't know what the effect when insolvency cases occur, or we don't know how you can create a trust over VCC as a trust property, or how can we take it as a custody. So all of these issues bundle up into determining what the legal nature of VCC is. So the legal nature helps determine which mechanism under basic law, like countries which have civil law is the basic law, applies. So rules provided for in basic law would apply when the parties' intentions are unclear or when we need to consider about a third-party effectiveness. So if you have a contract, basically the contract will deal with many of the aspects, but there are definitely cases where contract is not really clear, or you need to assert the effect of something to a third party, which law needs to determine how that occurs. So VCC is essentially, in many jurisdictions, would fall under intangible property, right? So intangible property, so VCCs are subject of proprietary rights, and it establishes as an asset with economical value. But unlike tangible movable assets, which are land or goods, it's not really clear, even if you say VCCs is an intangible asset, what characteristic entails from that. So you need to really have a legislative intervention is needed. Sorry, I hear my voice somewhere. So, okay, thank you. No. Okay, so you need to have a legislative intervention to determine the legal nature. So this is where UNIDROIT comes into play. So UNIDROIT, as I said, is an intergovernmental organization which has for years dealt with modernization and harmonization of private and commercial law. And it has already proven its record in creating principles to modernize laws in digitalization field, which is the UNIDROIT's principles on digital assets and private law. So UNIDROIT is now creating a principle for a private law legal nature of VCC. And this is to try to recognize legal nature of the VCC irrespective of any jurisdictions, and to aim to reduce legal uncertainty by determining the legal nature of the VCC. Sorry, if you can go to the next slide, please. The working group of UNIDROIT is chaired by Professor Hideki Kanda. He's a professor from Japan. And the working group is composed of experts from different legal systems in different fields that deals with carbon credit trading, and someone like me who is a professor of property law. The project has been going on for 2 years. We plan to have a tentative proposal by April, and this will go to the governing council of UNIDROIT. And after that, there will be a period of public consultation. And then we plan to finalize the principle by this year or the next year. So that is the plan so far. The next slide, please. So the structure of principle is as shown in the slide. The scope shows that the UNIDROIT is only going to deal with the private law nature of it. So we are not going to deal with the regulation, but we are aware that regulation and private law nature comes hand in hand. So you need to have both in order to have a liquefied market. Important part is that it has a general principle saying that VCCs can be the subject of proprietary rights. We will also include some things about tokenization and interoperability as well, but we haven't had the opportunity to work in the working group yet on these aspects. Next slide, please. So VCCs as subject of property rights need to meet the criteria of property under private law. So what are the criteria of private law for an asset to meet as an object or the subject of property rights? There's basically 3 elements, and that's probably universal. So the 3 elements are, first, it is an individualized asset. The second is that you have an exclusive attribution. So here I put it as you have a control over it. Third is that it's transferable. All of these three elements for VCCs are done through registry. So registry is really the crucial part in trying to justify that VCCs can be the subject of proprietary rights. So with that in mind, please the next slide. As I mentioned a little bit, proprietary rights must have some fixed structure under law. But since registry is something that you can have a contractual flexibility because registries provide services depending on diverse registries, it has flexibility. So the working group is really put forward with an issue trying to determine how much of the flexibility that the registries have can fit into the traditional property framework. So it is always going around what is the traditional justification and what is the actual practice doing. So that is sort of like the cycle that we are always considering in our mind. Another point that I would like to point out that I said is that unlike tangible movable property, intangible properties are not a distinct legal category in many jurisdictions. So we have to try to figure out whether it has affinity to digital asset or it has affinity to negotiable instruments. So we have to consider what kind of traditional legal framework, not traditional when we talk about digital asset, but what kind of already existing framework can we use to determine the property nature of it. So when we consider about interoperability, all of these come into play. So we are playing with the traditional notion as well as trying to figure out how to fit the practice that already exists. Thank you.
Thank you, Megumi. And now I would like to invite our other online panelists. And let me start with Anton Tsvetov from ICVCM. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, JC, and it's a big pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I would really love to be there in person, but this time I'm coming to you from London. So really exciting discussions so far, and great presentations. I think I was involved in many of these as well. We've had some really interesting interactions last year during my trip to Hong Kong, and I was also observing the UNIDROIT meetings and participating in them. So it's really falls into place. So, and I'll focus a little bit on what the ICVCM is doing in this process, in this ecosystem. And clearly, both the infrastructural elements and the legal nature issue are crucial for enhancing interoperability, and this is what this market needs. An openness and an interoperability is what helps get a better price, what helps connect buyers to suppliers, and to make carbon credits essentially something that is interesting to trade in. And the Integrity Council is dealing with the supply side of integrity in the market and trying to solve that piece of the puzzle. The Integrity Council is an independent governance body for the voluntary carbon market, and we regulate supply side quality by introducing a threshold for supply side integrity, essentially for what carbon credits stand for and what the integrity that is behind them. And if we go to the next slide, please. We are focused on three main areas of work. The core of our work is assessment. So the core carbon principles were mentioned here today, and I particularly like to thank Gary for lending his support from HKEX to the core carbon principles. I'll talk about them in a second, but essentially what we're doing now is we are assessing carbon crediting programs in the independent space and their carbon crediting methodologies against these core carbon principles. We're also working with stakeholders in the market, focusing on regulators, international organizations, the market itself, market participants, and stakeholders in core communities like the indigenous people and local communities. And we're also working on continuous improvement, which is essentially looking at the issues that are there in the market that are not yet in the ICVCM rule set, and looking whether these will have to become part of that rule set and set best practice at a future point. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the core carbon principles themselves. They are relatively straightforward for anyone who has been involved in the carbon market, but what we're really looking at is a set of requirements that are there in the what we call the assessment framework, which is an operationalization of these principles in a set of very specific requirements, about 200 requirements for carbon crediting programs and for carbon crediting methodologies. Now, very broadly, we're looking at governance and how programs are managed, at their transparency requirements, at the reporting requirements, what is available on the registries, what information is available to third parties, how is verification, validation arranged, and what is the accountability and transparency of that process, how credits are tracked. Of course, something that is traditionally considered to be part of integrity and sometimes referred to as environmental integrity is the emissions impact section, which deals with core issues of defining that a carbon credit represents a real, measured, verified ton of CO2 equivalent that was reduced or removed from the atmosphere. And that deals with additionality, permanence, robust quantification, which includes leakage and no double counting. And the third big group of requirements is sustainable development benefits and safeguards and contribution to net zero. And though it's sometimes, I think at this point, it is no longer considered to be an extra for carbon credits. It's considered to be, well, for us at least, in the core of what constitutes a good credit. Because we know that both buyers are looking at that, and this is crucial for restoring the trust in the market and building demand. So essentially what we're doing now is, and on the next slide, this will be shown, is we are assessing the carbon crediting programs and methodologies against these requirements. Can we go to the next slide, please? Essentially, it's a two-track process. We're assessing programs and we're assessing methodologies. And whenever a program has successfully gone through the program assessment process, it gets a half of the label. And then as soon as it has methodologies that were approved, it can start labeling credits issued under those methodologies. And we can go to the next slide. We have now 6 programs that are approved, again, to reiterate, at program level. So we have looked at their rules, looked at how they implement program level requirements, sustainable development safeguards at program level. And these are the big 5 programs, plus the last addition is isometric, which is a relatively new program. It's one of those new wave of innovative programs focusing on removals. And we can go to the next slide to talk about the methodologies that are currently approved. This is the most boring looking slide in my presentation, but I guess it's one of the most important ones, which actually looks at which of the carbon crediting activity types are at methodology level are currently approved by the ICVCM. Now the process is ongoing, and we have quite a few other methodologies to assess and to complete assessment, and throughout this year we will hopefully go through the first big round of assessment. These are of course ongoing. So what happens now is that if programs that were there in the previous slide have credits that are issued under these methodologies that you can see on this slide, then they could start labeling And we're seeing that credits have now arrived at the market. We're looking at interest, increased retirements in these credits, and collecting data on the price premiums that are there in the market. If we go to the next slide, we can see the continuous improvement work programs. And these are a set of essentially thought leadership exercise. We're collecting people from the market. We're throwing very difficult problems at them and looking at if they can produce ideas on where the market needs to go next to ensure integrity in these areas. We have completed the first 5 programs, and we're going to be producing some public-facing outcomes on these fairly soon. And these deal with the harmonization of the Paris Agreement, which is, of course, crucial as Article 6 gears into operational mode. They look at next stages for social safeguards and permanence, which is, of course, a key issue in the market. And we're having a second batch of these programs being started this year. I've highlighted one that I think might be very interesting for this group as well, which focuses on market transparency, standardization, and scalability. And we're going to look at programs' revenue models. We're going to look at standardized contracts and how that works. And I believe we will have some participation from the UNIDROIT group as well to talk to us about legal nature, because all those issues are interconnected. If we go to the last slide, next one, I'm going to briefly talk about regulation governance, which I think is a crucial conversation that is really useful to have here. Now, this is just a broad mapping of where regulation can be important for the VCM. And this is very loosely based on supply and demand, though we know that at national level, usually regulators do not separate conceptually supply and demand. They operate in a single space. And here we're talking about, on the demand side, governments lending political support and showing that, VCMs can deliver private finance at scale. And there are instruments of getting that going and scaling that. We're looking at disclosure standards. We heard about ISSB implementation today. I mean, it is a crucial way to allow companies to disclose with integrity things they're doing in the carbon market. We're looking at new instruments in the market and pricing systems and border adjustment mechanisms, and we have to have a conversation around how the VCM can be useful in delivering those goals. And of course, on the supply side, very straightforwardly, I think countries have a lot bigger role to play in facilitating the adoption of higher standards as host countries and incentivizing regional actors and local companies, local private sector participants to engage in higher integrity initiatives. Now, just to close up, what we expect this to do is for the market to get very clear signals on what is good, right? What good looks like, and to engage with this market with confidence, knowing that if they have a carbon credit, if we're looking at a carbon credit that is CCP labeled, they're looking at something that is that represents a real ton of emissions reduced or removed, that there is integrity in how that credit came to be, that the program that issued it has high integrity rules around governance and tracking and avoidance of double counting. There are social safeguards and environmental safeguards were there, that there are no, this means essentially reducing risk, standardizing the market, standardizing the product we're trading, and then moving that into high integrity demand frameworks where one can orient themselves towards VCMI, which we strongly suggest. But and any demand framework that could then reference ICVCM and CCPs as basing the claims and any sort of regulation or compliance use on high confidence carbon credit. Thanks, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Anton. So next up is Lydia Sheldrick from VCMI, who will be focusing on the demand side. Lydia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today, but apologies for not being there in person. I have a couple of slides. I don't know if the administrator could pull them up. Thank you. So just to start by saying that VCMI really welcomes the Pathfinder efforts. Voluntary carbon markets are a critical part of the solution and are currently underutilized, with the potential to reach $50 billion by 2050 and leverage other forms of finance. So it's going to take a real coordinated effort between different stakeholders regionally and internationally in order to unlock these markets. And there is a huge opportunity in the region, and VCMI is fully supportive of the Pathfinder's efforts. Next slide, please. By way of a brief introduction, VCMI is a global non-profit organization working with governments, companies, and other non-state actors in order to accelerate climate action through enabling and ensuring high-integrity voluntary carbon markets deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement. So to do that, we need standards to underpin these markets, incentivize action, and enable interoperability, both regionally and internationally, to allow for international trade. So I think it's important to really emphasize the need for standards on the demand and supply sides. So VCMI focus on the demand side, docking in with ICVCM and supply side efforts in order to create an end-to-end integrity framework. So we need both in order to ensure that these markets deliver benefits to the atmosphere and in order to cut through the credibility crisis which has curtailed demand. And as we know, if there is no demand, there is no market. So that's really what VCMI was set up to address, announced in the run-up to COP26 by the COP26 president designate. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges which have been described relating to fragmentation, lack of clarity and trust, and barriers to interoperability are barriers which we at VCMI have been thinking about for a long time and set up to help tackle. So this just shows where we operate in the space of VCM governance, focusing on the demand side for developing standards, creating that end-to-end integrity framework with ICVCM on the supply side, and then also highlighting GCMU's role supporting on the market infrastructure side. Next slide, please. So looking at collaboration in the theme of today's discussion, what is it that we need? I think there are four themes for collaboration to help focus our minds. So one is around engaging and supporting governments to take action through providing very clear political support for voluntary carbon markets and developing the enabling policy to unlock and scale up action. And this is really important because we've done a lot of work to build a blueprint for integrity, but integrity alone won't drive demand. And without demand, again, there is no market. So government action is critical and can draw on VCMI standards as well as ICVCM to create that enabling environment. Second is around utilizing regional initiatives such as the Pathfinder to really drive forward the interoperability. And again, that's where the work that we have done can really help provide a reference point. Thirdly is on international collaboration, so looking at where there are opportunities for pilots, capacity building in order to accelerate implementation and showcase examples of action and impact, which can then motivate others to pile in and cascade those efforts across within and across regions. Last but not least is around communications. So there have been significant headwinds, criticism within the media around voluntary carbon markets, which has sort of tarnished the whole market based on some instances of criticism. So there's a real need to reshift the narrative, educate and build awareness, and really show the needs and examples of success within these markets. And then, so next slide, please. Just highlighting some of the tools which we have developed as VCMI and with our networks, which can really be leveraged in these efforts. So number one is the Claims Code of Practice. That's the guidance for companies on how to use carbon credits to accelerate global net zero, in addition to their science-aligned emissions cuts, and to make verified claims, which gives companies the confidence and recognition to use carbon credits as part of their net zero transitions to address their residual and remaining emissions. It incorporates and builds on other standards such as CDP, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and aligns with disclosure frameworks such as ISSB, CSRD, etc., for a comprehensive framework which supports companies to come into alignment with established best practice and use carbon credits in addition to that. Secondly is on the Scope 3 guidance, which is currently in beta version. This is also a demand-side standard. It is guidance for companies to use carbon credits towards their Scope 3 emissions gap, i.e. the emissions gap within their value chains, while getting on the path to net zero. And this includes guardrails to ensure that carbon credits are still used in addition and not to delay decarbonisation. This tool is really important because studies have shown that around 60% or more of companies are currently failing to realise their emissions reductions within their value chains, i.e. their Scope 3 emissions reductions. And so by enabling companies to use carbon credits to address that Scope 3 emissions gap, there is a potential to generate demand for 2.2 gigatons of mitigation cumulatively by 2030. So a huge climate impact that would not happen otherwise. And by doing so, mobilize and generate demand through voluntary carbon markets to channel finance to projects on the ground. So we are looking forward to getting ready to publish that guidance in the coming months. And that can provide one area of strong dock-in with the Pathfinder to see where and how we can leverage that towards the Pathfinder's objectives. Finally, we have the Access Strategies program. And that is a program providing capacity building and technical assistance to host countries to access high-integrity voluntary carbon markets in complement to Article 6 and compliance markets. So we work with jurisdictions at the state and national level to develop their strategies and approaches to channel voluntary carbon markets finance into their national climate, economic, and social development plans. So again, potentially an opportunity there to leverage that program with Pathfinder countries and projects. That is it from me. Thank you very much for this really interesting conversation. And I look forward to collaborating as we move this forward.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And last but not least, let me invite Hari from the World Bank. Hari, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse, and good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. So, someone can put my slides up, please. Well, slides are coming again. Thanks for the invitation and also asking us to share what the World Bank is doing to support interoperable carbon markets. So we also welcome the Pathfinders initiative, which I think is a very critical initiative to support enhancing the region's decarbonization efforts using carbon markets as one of the tools. Go to next slide, please. This already, I think the previous speakers spoke about, but I think just to reiterate, to build effective and interoperable carbon markets, so we need to focus on several key components. For us, harmonization of regulations is very essential to ensure consistency and then fairness across different markets. Capacity building, of course, I think is a no-brainer, and it's very critical as it helps stakeholders understand and navigate these complexities of carbon markets. Then transparency through infrastructure, which again I think previous speakers also talked about. I think how important it is to enhance trust and accountability. Uh, Engaging with the private sector, it is one of the major challenges actually many policymakers struggle to deal with, like how do we actually bring them both at the policy making level, but also of course like an operationalization of the different policies, and then providing incentives so that they drive innovation and then investment that is needed. And then finally, the regional partnerships. I think especially in the region, this is very very crucial, and to strengthen the collective efforts, and also of course to help enabling us to share best practices and also the resources if possible. Go to next slide. Here, just to give you a little bit of flavor on the role of the World Bank. As many of you know, World Bank plays a significant role in supporting carbon markets. Of course, bank is involved in this market for more than 2 decades now, right from the CDM days, and then now of course, into the Paris Agreement. We manage, of course, various initiatives and partnerships, and then we launched during Dubai COP what we call it is an engagement roadmap for carbon markets, which of course drives the our strategic approach, and then what are the areas that we need to focus on. Because we support the carbon market initiatives through primarily the Partnership for Market Implementation Facility (PMIF), and which of course focuses mostly on the enabling environment side. Where not just only on the carbon markets, of course, the initiative also looks into the carbon pricing, domestic carbon pricing, which of course almost every major economy in the region is considering implementing domestic carbon pricing. How actually those domestic instruments interact with international carbon markets. How do we actually help countries and policymakers to make informed decisions? And we have, of course, several carbon funds, such as Scale and FCPF, TCAF, and CDEV. These are the funds basically also purchases emission reductions from the programs that are mainly supported by the bank's own lending. We of course also collaborate with the technical assistance providers like Japan's Article 6 implementation partnership, Green Growth Institute, ICVCM, VCMI, UNDP, and of course the UNFCCC. And then of course we jointly produce guidebooks actually that are essential for countries to navigate these carbon markets. Additionally, of course, like as I mentioned, so we focus on monetizing the emission reductions from eligible bank operations. We majorly focus only the large-scale programs that are transformative in nature, and then that brings, of course, an immense community benefits. So we are no more actually working on individual project types for the carbon markets. We basically look into different methodological approaches like sectoral crediting and jurisdictional crediting and policy-based crediting, and then how actually those things could provide needed carbon revenues to the countries. We also, of course, lead and then work on several methodologies, for carbon markets, especially. Again, I just mentioned, so we look into some innovative and then a new type of the methodologies that are not exist in the market at the moment, so that we can lead and then help market players. One of the other things that, of course, bank also focuses is on developing some kind of risk mitigation strategies, especially we know some of the risks associated with corresponding adjustments that countries needs to commit to. What of course happens if countries revocate actually such authorizations and then not do corresponding adjustments, and also how do we actually leverage carbon finance to access more revenues. So we also help countries to structure financing tools, basically, like for example carbon linked bonds, etc., which we successfully launched one in Vietnam last year, and then also of course like in for Amazon project in Brazil recently. We also facilitate dialogue and convene global players through different initiatives like Climate Market Club, and then where we bring countries to talk about operationalization aspects of the carbon markets. And we have a carbon action forum where we bring buyers and then sellers to talk about the contractual matters and then structuring the deals and etc. And then we have a digital for climate where we again convene global players to talk about infrastructure related aspects. And then of course I'm sure you are all aware of the the global forums that like Innovate for Climate. That bank, of course, conducts on an annual basis, and of course under the PMI program, we conduct a lot of global, regional, and then country level workshops as well to bring more awareness, but also to build the capacity of different stakeholders. Next slide, please. This is just to give a glimpse of, and this is very busy. I'm sure actually you cannot read actually the text here, but I think this gives an overview of the different work components under the Partnership for Market Implementation (PMI) program. I wanted to highlight two things. One is the country engagement, where we are currently working with more than 30 countries. All countries, of course, talk about the carbon markets, but majority also talk about the either building their readiness to understand the role of the domestic carbon pricing, and then many also implementing the carbon pricing. For example, in the region, of course, we are working with Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, China, to name few on domestic carbon pricing instruments. Through this program, we also aim to provide comprehensive support and guidance to countries as this under the global knowledge window that you can see here. Under the innovation, I mean that's basically where we do a lot of new thinking and the new products for prototyping, etc. In fact, the Carbon Action Data Trust, CAT Trust, that what we call it, is actually one of the products under this innovation pillar. Here, of course, you can see because we have a different windows for countries, depending on where their readiness is to introduce domestic carbon pricing and to participate in the international carbon market. So this gives, of course, a range of countries that we are working and across different continents. Next slide, please. So how do we actually support these countries? I mean, for us, supporting countries, covers on different things like enabling environment, infrastructure, capacity building, developing the financial tools, and etc. So we have multiple, products that we use and tools that we use. Especially one thing I wanted to highlight is the country guidance note that we jointly developed with all the partners that I mentioned previously and also listed here. That is basically to help countries systematically, think through the different the decision points that they need to make as part of their carbon markets journey. So we have, of course, developed some 7 strategic questions that every country should ask themselves as part of their carbon market journey. And we are now elaborating those 7 questions and then converting that into a detailed guidance note, which we are aiming to launch in April during the World Bank Spring meetings. And of course, we also have a letter of authorization toolkit, which consists of the templates for how the letter of authorization should look like for countries, and also the MIGA, which is the risk mitigation arm of the World Bank. Of course, came up with a product to deal with the risks with the corresponding adjustments. So we also, of course, deploy those things with the country. And most importantly, also we help countries developing these policy frameworks that is more comprehensive enough to look into the role of domestic carbon pricing, Article 6 markets, and also the voluntary carbon markets. And then, of course, legal matters that, of course, I think already we'll talk about. I mean, we also closely coordinate with UNIDROIT and then ISCO basically on these matters. And then the infrastructure support. This is one of the major work components of our program, basically, wherein we offer countries open source to infrastructure solutions, but also training and then of course the design of the functional and technical specifications of those systems. As I said, of course, the enhancing the capacity building for countries with clarity on both Article 6.2, 6.4 requirements is priority at this stage, because many countries wanted to understand better what the Baku text is about, and then what impact actually it will have on the voluntary carbon markets, how they need to ensure that they maximize the opportunities actually these markets can bring. And then our capacity building support mostly deployed through our various World Bank initiatives. I also wanted to highlight the what we call as World Bank Academy, under which, of course, we have a Carbon Markets Academy where we develop e-courses and then of course online training and also face-to-face training for different stakeholders. We aim to accelerate this generation of the carbon credits to large programs, as I mentioned. So some of the things that I mentioned here, of course, are the type of the projects that we are working. Now, as I think Lydia also mentioned, Anton also mentioned about these things, like how do we also tackle some of the demand side issues. I think Lydia also talked about under her presentation, because that's one of the major work activities for us also to look into, to explore basically how do we actually help mobilizing the demand for these projects. So we do this carbon action forum where we facilitate the dialogue between different players, but we also looking into some other aspects, like can Article 6 or these carbon credits could be recognized under this in the CBAM by the EU. So what are the things that we are, of course, coordinating with other actors that are thinking on this particular topic. So these are some of the things that we are looking, and then we basically, especially helping countries and enabling environment and capacity building. We are more than happy to support and then coordinate and then contribute to the Pathfinders initiative and then explore the opportunity that exists to help countries in the region. Thanks, and over to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Hari. This has been a very fruitful session, and unfortunately we have run out of time, so we won't be able to have questions and open discussion for this session. Let me just make a very brief summary. What we tried to do in this session is actually to provide details and color to the summary of the Pathfinder initiative that Nakasu-san mentioned and showed to you in his opening remarks. And basically, first of all, that APEC is important because supply and demand for carbon credits is there. The bulk of supply of carbon credits is in APEC, and more than half of demand is also in APEC. So it's very important to do this Pathfinder initiative. Also, APEC is very interesting because trading platforms are emerging, as Nakasu-san has mentioned. And so we mentioned in the US, in Australia, in Singapore, and in Hong Kong, where we discussed its role as a super corridor, super connector to link China's carbon markets with the rest of the world. And that's part of the work of Hong Kong Exchange's Core Climate. But in order for this market to grow, it needs to scale. And in order to scale the market, we need to align the standards. And that's what we're doing with for example, UNIDROIT. we need to align the legal standards. Normally, market participants don't pay much attention to markets, to legal frameworks. But in APEC, we've been through 3 cycles of crisis. We had the Asian crisis, we had the IT crisis, and then we had the GFC. And what we learned is that people sort of only realize the importance of legal frameworks once companies become insolvent, people become miserable, and all of these things. And then they start working on these things. So we've got Basel II, Basel III, Basel IV, and all of these legal reforms. So we're trying to develop systems that would make the growth of carbon markets sustainable. And of course, the importance of integrity standards. And that's what we're doing with ICVCM and VCMI. ICVCM on the supply side, VCMI on the demand side. And finally, the development of ecosystems, especially in developing economies, and connecting registries in order to address the issue of double counting. And these are the things that we're doing with the World Bank. So the presentations that you've heard today really provides sort of the details on what we intend to do with these institutions. And these are not the only institutions we'll be working with. So for example, we're working with ISDA and many other institutions. So this has been a very fruitful session, and so please join me in thanking our panelists for being with us: Gary, Megumi, Ken, Anton, Lydia, and Harry. So.
Thanks to the panelists and the moderator. Let's send them with another round of applause. Thank you.